Hello, welcome back. We are on the third video in this series where I'm building out a Notion template for project and task management with goal tracking and some other things. In the previous videos, we set up pretty much all the databases we're going to use for this template. We got a Lifetracks database to sort of contain all the projects and tasks in different life categories, I suppose. We have a task database which covers tasks and projects. And then we also have recurring tasks, time tracking, metric tracking, and goals for those metrics. So we've got a lot. We've done a lot so far. But now we have to build out the rest of the template. It's usable technically, but it's not really easy to use. When designing a template, there are two main use cases that I have to think about: entering data and viewing data. We want to make it as easy as possible to see the most important information at a glance, and we want it to be as easy as possible to put in new tasks and new goals and things like that. So I'm going to work on the dashboard first, and the way I work, I tend to go back and forth, tweaking and adding mostly display properties as I need them, but I'll try to edit this so it's as straightforward as it can be. First, I know I want a gallery of cards for all the life tracks right at the top, and I want this to be an overview of all the things in the system so you can see at a glance sort of how everything is coming together. And this is why I made the display progress bars for the goals, because I knew I would want that information to filter up at the top level, and I knew I would want it to be formatted a certain way. I also want to show how many projects and tasks there are open in each life track. To do this, I add a few properties to the tasks. One that determines whether it is a project or not. This is a formula property. We can check our parent and sub items and return true if this has sub items but not parent items. And then otherwise we return false. I have another property that returns if this task is today. And the reason I made this formula is because I hadn't yet figured out how to coerce that empty string into a date value. If you have like a branch of like an if statement in your formula that returns something that is not a date, it will not count that property as a date. I did figure out how to fix it, but at this point in the recording I had not figured it out yet. So I just added this checkbox. If it's today, it's checked, and if not, it's not checked. And this actually had a little trick to it because of how things kind of work in Notion for dates with the date ranges. So in order to actually get this, I had to get a date range for the current day. So what I did was I got the start of the current day and the end of the current day by just formatting dates at those times. So I used today, and then I used date parsing to grab the actual day out of that value. Then I just added 0, midnight and 23:59 to create a range that covers the entire day. There's probably a better way to do this, but this is what I did. When making the display properties for the number of open tasks and the number of total tasks and projects, I just use the same relation properties and list functions that we've been using until now to get all the filter on all the ones that are open or the status is not done, and then also get all of them, get the length of that list. All of this is stuff we've done before. And then I just use some emojis to spice things up a little bit, and then text formatting to make some of the text bold. So you could do .style with a B as a parameter to make the text bold. There's others as well, probably italics, probably underline, though I don't typically like those very much, so I don't use them. Next, I want to display some of the metrics on the LifeTrack cards, but first I need to figure out what this value should be displayed as. This is just like the goals, where sometimes it makes sense to sum the values, other times you just want to get the most recent value. So we are going to do the exact same thing here. I'm adding a property that lets me set the display value first, and then the formula property itself is really just an if statement where if I have sum, I sum it. If it's average, I average it. And if it's latest or last, whatever I called it, I get the last value. So this is pretty much identical to that other one. We just have to do less aggregating in this one because we're not worried about dates. We just want to grab all of them. Then I want a checkbox for whether I want to show this metric on the Lifetracks card. This is really just preemptive. I'm expecting that I will be adding things, and I will want things to not always show up here. because it will get too messy. So initially I'll probably check all the metrics that I add, but as I go through multiple like months, multiple quarters with this template, hopefully, I may want to clean it up, and I've added these checkboxes to do that. And finally, I just need a display string for that metric. I decided to include the name of the metric, a little ASCII shape for decoration, the number value, and the units. And after that, I just add this to the Lifetracks, making sure I'm only filtering on metrics that should be displayed according to the checkbox property that I added. The next thing I want is to start adding progress to the tasks, and I could have done this earlier. I just didn't think about it until it came time to display it, and I realized I didn't have it. And there are a few different pieces to get right here. First of all, I have the recurring tasks. Some of the recurrences will be done, and some of the recurrences will be not done, they'll be skipped. And so I want to get the progress of that as one part of it. These tasks can also have subtasks, and I want to roll up the subtask progress into the progress. And then we have the task itself has the amount target, the amount done. So we have a bunch of different progresses to sort of roll up into one value here. I'll start with the recurring progress. So we'll need a formula for that. If the task has a recur type, that's how we're sort of identifying these as recurring tasks. We want to calculate the recurring progress, and otherwise we just want to use the regular progress. So for the recurring progress, I'll use a lets to make two variables. All recurring tasks gets the length of the task history, and then completed recurring tasks first filters on which ones are done and then gets that length. And then with those values, we do completed tasks divided by all tasks, and then the rounding trick I mentioned earlier to get a cleanly rounded number. And then if we don't have a recur type, for now we're just going to use the tasks properties. So the task amount done divided by the task target, pretty easy. And then next I do need the progress for the subtasks. And because of how this works, we will need a separate property. We can't include it on this one because you can't reference a property from itself, even if it's on a different object. This is like this for like recursion problems. They don't want you calculating, you know, the property of something that's dependent on something that is dependent on that first thing. So for this reason, we will need a separate subtask progress property. And this is pretty easy. We're just getting all the progress from all the subtasks and averaging them. This is the easiest way to do it, I think, because that way if you have one thing that's 0% done, one thing that's 100% done, you know, the average of that is 50. So I think this math will work out. And then once we have that subtask progress property, we want to go back to this progress, which is what I named the first one, in order to get the progress including both the subtasks and everything else correctly. We want to do another averaging. So if this task has a target amount, if it has its own progress, we will average it with the subtask progress. And I initially missed a second part of this because this initial formula was not including the recurring tasks with the subtasks. So I just added a second part of that check, and or if it has a target amount, or if it has that recurring task variable, recur type, then we want to average the progress so that we're including both values. And then on the Lifetracks, I want to show basically what amounts to a roll-up of all the top level items, tasks, and projects assigned the Lifetrack. And the way I do this is with a formula property task progress. We have a let that lets us create a variable top level tasks. For this, I'm using the tasks relation, filtering on current.parent_item.empty. So this only is things at the top level that don't have a parent item. And then we do a map and we do current.thisProgress to get a list of all the progress values. And then with that list of progress values, we do again the sum divided by the length to average that progress across all the tasks. And we use our rounding trick again to get a nice cleanly rounded number. I'm going to use the task progress bar as a sort of divider. So I'm going to put it between the metrics and the goals just by dragging the property order in the gallery view. And for purely aesthetic reasons, I'm also adding a formula with a new line in it, just to space these cards out a little. And this is a little trick. If you want like a label or a divider or something that should be the same on every item and you don't want to go in and paste it in, you can use a formula and you can just set the formula to that value and then it will be like that. So I used \n for a new line, and now I can have a little space here between some of the properties. I also need to keep track of all the time spent from the time logs that we set up. For this, the formula should be much simpler because we always want to sum the time. We never average it because that's not how it works. It's not a percentage, it's just a cumulative amount. So in the tasks database, I have a formula that gets all the time logs for this task. And the way I did this actually was, I think, incorrect. So the way I did it was I actually just got all the time logs and then I got all the time logs for the subtasks. But this breaks down if you have more than 2 levels of like parenting in the tasks. So I went back as I was editing this and I changed it so that I am using a like subtask minutes property separately, like we did for the progress. And so this will accumulate all the subtask time logs in one property, and then we can use the all minutes to add those 2 values together. And so now it should correctly roll up through multiple levels of subtasks, if you want like 3 levels of subtasks, which I don't usually do, but I want this to be a flexible template that different people can use for different things. So I wanted to make sure I got that in. Then on the life tracks, in order to get the time spent in a readable format, we can convert this from minutes to hours. First, the total minutes are the sum of the top level tasks, all minutes property, and then we can use floor to round down to get the hours, and then if we subtract the rounded hours from the non-rounded hours, we can get the remainder. We can use the remainder times 60 to get the remaining number of minutes. Next, we will go back to the dashboard. I'm going to make another view into the goals database so I can see at a glance what I've got my sights set on, what my goals are. Keep them top of mind, top of page, top of mind, as they say. I don't think anyone says that. This will give us slightly more detail than the progress bars on the life track. So setting up this view, I did a lot of shuffling and back and forth work, and I ended up with this set of properties that I wanted here. First, the text that shows whether we are on track or not, the date range of the goal, text showing the progress and the goal together, and then our percentage through the date range and the percentage completed that we set up before. I also added a formula to figure out how many items, how many parts of our goal we are ahead or behind schedule if we are off track. And the way to do this is to use the percent through and multiply that by the total goal. And that is, in theory, if we're working on this linearly, how much we should have done at this point. And then we subtract our current progress metric total from that number to get the amount we are off by. And if it's negative, we are ahead of schedule. And if it's positive, we are behind schedule. If it's 0, we are exactly on schedule. And in that case, I've decided to just leave it blank. So now we have these 2 overviews at the top of the dashboard, so I can always see where I'm at with my tasks, my progress, my goals at a very high level. Next, I want the ability to see all of today's tasks and the current week of tasks. Making a view for just today's tasks is pretty easy since we have that is today checkbox property. We can simply filter on that property. After that, I didn't need to add any more properties here, just trim down the ones I am displaying. I settled on the life track, category, status, amount done and amount target, the progress, and then the 3 buttons for finishing a recurring task, skipping a recurring task, and starting a time log. And I actually had an idea while I was looking at this. I wanted to only show the recurring buttons if the task was recurring. Unfortunately, it looks like you can't show buttons from another property in a formula, so it wasn't going to let me do that. So my compromise was, instead of hiding the buttons on tasks that weren't recurring, I'm just adding a little icon next to it if it is recurring, so I can see at a glance if I should be using those buttons or not. Coming back to the template after a little break, I also realized something else I wanted for the daily tasks. It should show unfinished tasks that are overdue as well. So not just due today, but due in the past and are not done. And when I tried adding the next due date to the filter, it did not register as a date like I've mentioned a long time ago. And at this point, I did add an is overdue formula that is very similar to is today, but the date ranges are a little bit different. And I've also added that so it only adds that task if the status is not a done status. At this point, I still had not figured out the date coercion, the date type coercion. So if you did that when I mentioned it earlier in the video series, you can just filter on the dates like normal, but it takes me a minute to get there. When I went to set up my weekly calendar, that is when I realized I was going to have to face this date property after all. So I did some Googling, I figured out that from timestamp thing, and just again, the way that you coerce an empty value into a date is from timestamp, and then for the value that you pass in there, you do an empty string to number, and then now this property finally shows up as a date, and we can use it as the date option in our weekly calendar view. In the weekly calendar view, I did notice that my subtasks weren't showing up on the list, the way like the default settings weren't showing them. And to fix this, I went in to change the sub items in the settings to use a flattened list. And then they started showing up as expected. And then I'm going to duplicate this view and make a monthly calendar view as well, just so I have a smaller scope and a larger scope together that I can use to see what's coming up. And this is actually where we're pausing for this video. We've brought together a lot of the template information into a pretty cohesive dashboard. I think this is most of the stuff I would need to see day to day. We have the overview at the top. We have all of our current due tasks that we're working on right in the middle where we can focus on them. We can change the progress, we can change the status, we can add a time log, we can do everything we need to do from here. And then lower down, we have a calendar to see what's coming up. So next time, we're going to start working on the other half of the equation, which is database templates, so that we can enter data pretty easily into these databases, because there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of relations that need to be in place. And we can always go and just type things into the database table like I've been doing. But it gets really tedious, especially when you have a lot of things that you're working on and you're setting it all up. So we're going to use templates in the next video to streamline that process. But that's all I have for now. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you found it useful, because I'll be back soon, and I hope to see you there. Bye-bye!